Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing we need to do is install Flask. And so I'm going to go to Settings, Python Interpreter, which is under Project colon, whatever your project name is. And then I'm currently configured to use a local interpreter, Python 3.12. And I have Flask installed already, but if I didn't, what I would do is click the plus and type Flask. And then first thing on the list, a simple framework for building complex web applications. It's up to version 3.03 right now. And I would go ahead and install the package. But since it's already installed, it just said Flask installed successfully. And then as part of Flask, it actually installs Jinja 2 as well, which is the templating system. And then this Werkzeug thing, which we'll be talking about a little bit later, which is basically a simple testable version of the web server. I'll talk about the difference later. And then a few other things, but those are the main components that we need. So I'm going to go say OK. And then I have the package structure with separate folders for UI. So in the UI folder, I'm going to make a new Python file called WebUI. And then from the top, I'm going to say from Flask import Flask. And then I'm going to have a class WebUI. And then I'm going to make everything, I'm going to use the singleton design pattern here too. So just like I did with the database and the console UI, I only want to have one web server at a time. So I'm just going to store things on the class itself and use class methods and static methods. So the main thing I need is an app. And then an app this is going to be what you get back when you call the main Flask constructor. So when you call Flask, it returns an app object that has some methods on it that let you configure and run the app. And so we're going to say Flask, which is a class constructor. And then this thing that you pass in is actually used primarily to find the other files that Flask needs to run. So for example, the templates folder, the static folder, where it puts Flask sessions, which we'll talk about at some point. So basically, you give it the module name. If you buy the standard thing, sometimes you want to do something different, but usually you just pass in the current module name. So when I'm running this from top level, when I run WebUI from top level, under name, under will be under main, but it will be the main in the same directory as the WebUI file is. So the files that Flask needs want to be relative to this file by default. So when I create my templates folder, that's going to go under UI as well. So we'll do that in a second. So there's an app. And then what you do with the app is you create routes. And so a good route to start with is this home page route. So basically, this is a URL that's relative to the root of your web server. And so this just slash is the root of the web server. And it's what you see when you navigate to a site as the home page. And then this is going to be, since we're in a class, it's going to be a static method. And unfortunately, you can't make things class methods just here because class methods require a parameter to be passed in, the CLS parameter. But this thing is a wrapper and it gets complicated. So I'm just going to make it static method and refer directly to the class for now. And then what you give it finally is something called a view function. So a view function is what gets run when the user navigates to this path in a browser and tries to load the page. And then the view function is what's actually going to produce the HTML that gets displayed on the page. So we'll start with the simplest possible view function. And this is going to be called, I'll call this home page. Yeah, home page is fine. And since it's a static method, it doesn't take any parameters. And I'm going to return hello world. So there's the code that I need to set up the web server, and then to actually run it, I'm going to provide another static method. Actually, this one could be a class method, so I'm going to go ahead and make this one be a class method because I don't need this app route thing. And then this is going to be my run method, so run. And mainly what you want to do is call, oops, I don't know why it just popped that up. That was weird. Mainly what you want to do is call the run method of the app object, and that will actually start your web server up using Werkzeug, which I briefly mentioned a moment ago. So here's my class, and if I run this file like a script, what I want to do is basically just call webui.run. And then I'm going to be adding an init method a little bit later on, but for now this will be fine. So let's go ahead and try it and see if it works. Oops, I ran console UI instead, which is not what I meant to do. So I'm going to right click on web UI and run this. Okay, so it started up okay, and what it's telling me is that it's serving a Flask app called web UI. And then it says, this is a development server, do not use it in a production deployment. Basically, it's not super efficient, the one that's built in. It's convenient for testing, but it's not high capacity. So if you wanted to use this for a real website with hundreds of thousands or millions of users, then you would want to use a real web server instead of Werkzeug. But for now, this is perfectly fine. And then by default, it's starting it on port 5000. So we're going to want to actually change that to be port 8000, which we'll do next. And then I'm going to click on the link, and it will open up in a browser. And it shows me the home page for my web server.